Ceann Corda, and welcome back to the House. Minister, on the issue of assessed grading and school profiling, you know the Labour Party's position on school profiling. We're very much against it, and I've written to the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission to seek their viewpoint on it. Their equivalent in the UK has issued guidelines to the UK Education Department relating to assessed grading. Their position is that it had negatively affects, or potentially negatively affects, on minority children, children with additional needs, children of disadvantaged backgrounds, and specifically high-achieving children in disadvantaged settings. So I expect that, or I hope that the Irish equivalent, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, will issue your own department with some recommendations, and hopefully the school profiling element, which is so controversial and so unnecessary, could be deleted from your own assessment criteria, which you are publishing tomorrow. I want to reference the issue of schools that may lose teachers. In September, schools are getting currently notification of appeals. I'll mention the school, but I won't mention the name of the school, Minister, because you know the school, because I sent the details to you yesterday. And it's a school which is going to lose a teacher because they have 200 students on the roll and they needed 201. And it's a DEIS Band 1 school, and it's in a particular geographical location which has suffered a huge amount of violence in the last 18 months. In fact, your own government admitted the necessity to have a task force, a Mulvey-style task force for this area, in order to identify reasons why there was such violence and to provide supports for the community, of which obviously will be educational supports. In fact, there was a shooting there even today, second in a week, in that postal code area, shall we say. And yet this school, DEIS Band 1, acutely disadvantaged on the basis of one student, is currently being told that they're going to lose a teacher. So obviously we would love you to stand to your feet today and say there's going to be a pause, there'll be a moratorium, there'll be no school in the country will lose a teacher in September, given the circumstances that we're in. But I appreciate that you can't make that commitment. It would be an expensive commitment to make, and not every situation is the same. But I would ask you to look at it, or at least to have a sympathetic appeals process that could take into account schools like this, going through situations like this, that are unnecessarily going to lose a teacher in September. So I've sent you the details, Minister. I hope you can look sympathetically at it, or that your department can look sympathetically at it. I know you say it's independent, but the Minister can, start a new process that could mean that such a school like this will not lose a teacher in September. You've mentioned July provision, Minister. I appreciate that a large element of your speech was about July provision. I think that gave a lot of comfort to people who have been asked to raise the issue with you, and I congratulate you on that, or thank you on that. But what we need to know is when the dates are going to be known and when further details are going to be known to us, and we get that as soon as possible, please. On the issues of school returning, again, Minister, a huge amount of disquiet about the fact that your government, it seems, when it comes to issue of commerce or business or retail, they're so in tune. The messaging is so tight. But when it comes to education, the messaging is so sloppy. And the Minister for Health can say in an interview in the Sunday Independent, Asher schools might go back in June. In this very chamber last Wednesday, when we were having questions over and back, the Taoiseach was off somewhere wondering aloud as to whether schools or childcare facilities could come back quicker, because that mightn't be as a high risk as other areas, and you may have a different position, Minister. So it's as if when it comes to education, it's not really that important, so we can just kind of talk off the top of our heads. But we all know the difference between hardware and home care, or hardware and homeware stores, because the messaging is tight. So why is the messaging around education so loose? Because it's so damaging, and it causes a huge amount of upset. And then we get representations from teachers and from parents who are wondering, what on earth is going on? Our school is going back in June. Is it going to be held over till September? And of course, we have different viewpoints on that. And nobody in this chamber is going to demand of you, Minister, to bring schools back in June. Nobody's going to make that demand. Nobody wants to stand over a demand that then we may regret in a number of months' time. But could you please give some certainty to the situation, and how the decision will be made, and who will make the decision, and what advice you'll be seeking or taking on board if and when that decision is made. And if it is going to be made, will there be a position where we come back in a phased basis? So could you speak to that, please, Minister? I want to make a reference, please, to the Teaching Council. I understand that trainee teachers are having difficulty with the Teaching Council. Those who are registering have difficulty with the Teaching Council. Those who have made approaches to the Teaching Council as 7th of April have still yet to get responses back. And those who are doing Hibernia are being told they still have to plough through with their online teacher training course, including going to the Gaeltacht, which students feel is completely unrealistic in the current circumstances, and it's a Teaching Council that oversee that. So could you speak to that, please? And lastly, as others have done, in relation to third level students, and of course again this pandemic rips open a lot of issues that are live in Irish society, but now we get a chance to talk about them and maybe do something about them. Students who work, low paid work over the course of the summer so they can survive in third level. And they can't go to the bank of mum and dad. And even if they could in the past, the bank of mum and dad has, or whatever parents they have at home, or whatever grandparents are at home, whatever guardians they have, that has been severely affected by the economic collapse and other issues. So in terms of SUSI, having a more robust SUSI system for 1 year, a more sympathetic SUSI system, recognising that students who, again, as they try and break out of disadvantage, as they try, in many cases, be the first person of their household to go to third level or go to further education, that it's not going to be a case of them saying to themselves, well, I can't do it now because I can't afford it, because I can't get the job that I would have gotten, and now I have to drop out and think about doing something else. So if you could speak to those issues, Minister, I greatly appreciate it.
Thank the Deputy, and take your points in relation to your concerns around the new model of calculated grades. In relation to your specific issue to do with school teacher allocation, we did get the information today in the office, so I've asked for an inspector to contact the school, make contact with the school, but as you correctly pointed out, it's an independent process. But one of the, I suppose, the rigid features of the teacher allocation model is that it is on numbers, and that there has to be a system and there has to be a threshold. And your wider proposal of departing from the system and retaining everybody that is in there at the moment, obviously there are financial considerations, and a few of the deputies have raised the issue, and yourself, in relation to SUSI and the difficulties families are going to have. And I think these are these are indicative of the broader, wider, deeper questions that we're going to be asked as legislators in this House in the time to come, because everything is going to be different. Parents are under pressure. The summer jobs that students had access to, they're not all there, so that is a big difficulty. But also you referenced the July provision. So as I said in my speech, we're not able to implement July provision in the normal, traditional way, what parents are used to, but we're very focused on trying to, and even if possible, widen it to look at a way that parents are happy with, but obviously within public health guidance as well. With regard to schools returning, and I suppose people are looking at what's happening in Britain and looking at what's happening in Europe. There's nobody wants schools back quicker than me as a parent, never mind as a Minister for Education. And people want that to happen, and people want their children in class and they want them in school. But obviously at the heart of everything we do, it has to be safe to do so. So the advice we have, and advice changes as we move along, and but the NEFID advice that we have at the moment is that schools are returning in September. But what we want to do, we want to put a proposal to NEFID in relation to special education and disadvantage, that we would like if at all possible, to see some schools opening to provide this school programme. So we're accepting the advice that schools won't be back in September. That is the advice we have today, and that's what we're working towards. But I think when my colleagues, or whether it's the Taoiseach is very interested and anxious to ensure that we have a full school programme for these students, because he knows from the advice that he's getting that there is regression. And you also referenced the Teaching Council as well.
You might correspond with the Deputy.
I'll correspond on that in relation to the
Deputy Gary Gannon, please.